Someone asked me this week, I think maybe in an effort to kind of be critical, they said, why would you have Brian Houston preach at your church? Oh, that's easy. Number one, for 40 years, Brian led a movement called Hillsong that shook the nation of Australia. And I intend to lead a movement that will shake the nation of America. So I assume it'd be good to get around other people who have done it. Number two, Hillsong either wrote, contributed to, or inspired a majority of the worship songs that are still being sung in churches like ours today. And number three, I refuse to hang on to expired versions of people, because that's what the devil does, not what Christians should do. Well, welcome to Mental Health Sunday. Appreciate your attendance this morning as I share a little bit of my story and what I believe the Bible has to say about a topic that is a needed item of discussion in the church of God in this moment. I've often debated whether or not I would ever share this part of my story, but I remain convinced that a message like this is exactly what the body of Christ needs in this hour. And I refuse to be embarrassed by stuff that most people deal with and are just too afraid to talk about. See, I believe that the enemy thrives in anonymity. He operates in darkness and in deceit. And if it is true that you are only as sick as the secrets you keep, then the greatest way for you to get healing is to find your voice and tell your story. See, at the conclusion of today's service, we're going to make time to pray and anoint with oil folks who are dealing with mental health challenges, and we're going to believe that God is still in the business of healing your body, healing your soul, and yes, even healing your mind. See, you may have been struggling for years. It may have been something that has run in your family. It might be the result of abuse, trauma, sin, or sickness. I frankly don't care how it started, because today can be the last day that it gets to dictate your outcomes. And see, Jesus wore a crown of thorns on his head. And the blood that those thorns produced still has the power to save, still has the power to heal, and still has the power to deliver every son or daughter of Abraham who is struggling today. And see, if it is true that there is therefore now no shame or condemnation in Christ Jesus, and if it is true that what the enemy has intended for evil, God can use for good, then it is equally as true that anything that you survived in your last season, the Lord will grant you victory over in the life of somebody else in your next season. Which is, by the way, why we host things like Conception Sunday. Because I refuse to allow the enemy to have victory in my wife and I's story of infertility. Yeah, it was terrible to walk through, but we survived it, and now we have authority over it. And so now we've got dozens of miracles from people who have traveled from all over the nation to attend services here at one of our campuses to receive prayer, that God would enable them to conceive against what all of the medical professionals and doctors have said. It is a test that has become a testimony that prophesies, if God did it for me, God can do it for you. See, I would submit to you today, friend, that survival is the only necessary credential you need in order to be an overcomer from this day forward. Joseph survived the pit, so he got the palace. Joshua survived the wilderness, so he got the promise. Elijah survived the drought, so he got the rain. And if the enemy wasn't so terrified of where you were headed, he wouldn't have tried so hard to take you out. But to be honest, the enemy should have killed you when he had a chance. Because now that you survived, you are the most equipped you have ever been to be an overcomer, to be a conqueror, and to be an ambassador of freedom in every sphere that you walk into. And my belief is that by the end of today's service, the enemy will have such a black eye, he don't ever try messing with you again. In Matthew 22, Jesus is asked a question by the Pharisees. Often they would use the avenue of questioning to try to trap him in these dialectical frameworks in an attempt to accuse him of blaspheming the law so that they could justify their taking of his life. Jesus is asked by the Pharisees in this moment, what is the greatest commandment? Thinking we've really trapped him now. There's at least 613 commandments that are given by Moses, and in the Old Testament, there's no way that he can just pick one. We've really got him now. And here's how Jesus responds. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. For this is the greatest commandment, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And if you do these two things, all the law and the prophets will be fulfilled. When we think about loving the Lord our God with all our heart, our soul, and our mind, I think it's helpful to go back to the original Greek to understand the intention of the authors as they recorded this moment in the life of Christ. To love God with all of your heart means with your character, your will, and your intention. To love God with all of your soul means your emotion, your affection, and your personality. But to love God with all your mind, that means your reasoning, your thoughts, and your imaginations. Like many of you in this room, I sincerely had a born-again experience when I was a small child, living at my grandmother's house in Sunnyside, Washington. I can still tell you the room that I was sitting in as a very young boy, where my mom led me through the sinner's prayer, and I gave my heart to God. In that moment, I knew that Christ had forgiven my sins, and I would commit the rest of my life to his plan and to his purpose. I never struggled loving God with my heart. I knew in that moment my life had been bought with a price. It was no longer my own. I would give him my future. I would give him my present. I would give him my past. I would make him Lord and Savior and trust the good plan and good purpose he had for my life. I never struggled loving God with my soul. I've always been expressive and emotive by nature. It comes out when I preach, and it comes out when I worship, and it comes out when I talk, and half the time I feel more excited about the content than the people who are listening. I am amped up by this God that I serve. But it's been the challenge of my life to love this God with my mind. And hear me, it's not because I don't want to, but instead because getting my mind to think right has been a particular struggle of mine for as long as I can remember. And the Bible speaks to the significance of your mind and the significance of the work that God desires to do within the framework of your mind. In Romans 12, Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Philippians 2 says, let this mind be in you, which was in Christ Jesus. Isaiah 26, God will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on the Lord. 2 Corinthians 10, we demolish arguments and every obstacle that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought in our mind to make it obedient to Christ. Ephesians 4, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Colossians 3, set your mind on things above, not on things below. 2 Timothy 1, for God has not given us a spirit of fear or a spirit of timidity, but power, love, and a sound mind. Romans 8, for to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life. 1 Peter 1, therefore preparing your minds for action, be sober-minded. And set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And why? Why is there such an emphasis on your mind in the scriptures? Well, number one, because your life moves in the direction of your strongest thought. Number two, because the power of life and death is in the tongue, and the tongue speaks what the mind thinks. Number three, because the scriptures say, as a man thinks within himself, so he is. And finally, number four, because the enemy knows that a believer who thinks right is one of the most dangerous weapons in the hand of God. Which means this, you can learn all the right facts, and you can hear all the best sermons, and you can sing all the greatest songs, but unless your mind is being made right by the Spirit of God, you run the risk of all of that other information going in one ear and out the other. My story begins in the 4th grade. At the age of 9, where I attended Loyal Heights Elementary School in Seattle, Washington. The year was 1996, and my teacher was a woman by the name of Mrs. Rutherford. I'll never forget the day that she came up to me after class and requested a meeting with my mom to talk about my behavior in the classroom. I thought for sure I would be grounded for the rest of my life. But to be honest, I had no recollection of doing anything wrong. At the end of that week, Mrs. Rutherford, she would come over to my house after the school day had ended. I'd answer the door when she knocked and show her to the living room and wait for my mom to arrive. When mom arrived, Mrs. Rutherford asked to speak with her in private, and mom asked me to go downstairs and wait, but curiosity got the best of me. So I hid in the hallway within earshot of the living room and listened as Mrs. Rutherford opened up about my behavior. Something is wrong with Russell. He doesn't sit still. He always appears to be shaking or moving or fidgeting. It never seems like he is paying attention. At times he stutters. He is quiet and then loud. He is nowhere and then everywhere. He seems lost within his own thoughts, anxious and worried, always present but never here. I think your son needs medication because something is wrong with Russell. These words, they were hard for my 9-year-old ears to hear. But in some ways, it was relieving. It was like for the first time in my life, someone gave language to the noise in my brain. Something was wrong with Russell, and I would spend the next 3 decades trying to figure it out. I mean, just look at that picture. Clearly something is wrong. This looks like the throwback photo from every Netflix documentary about a serial killer who had a normal upbringing, yet butchered cats in his backyard for fun. My sweatshirt says Western. It's not Western State, it's Western Hospital. Throughout my middle school and my high school years, that noise would become louder. It would manifest as anxiety, depression, insomnia, panic attacks, obsessive tendencies, and thoughts of self-harm. I would regularly find myself apologizing to people I had never met, convincing myself that somehow I had wronged them and yet blocked it out of my memory. My devotional life was consumed with hoping God wouldn't strike me dead for sins that I had forgotten. Despite my inability to sit still, by some miracle, I would go on to graduate high school and then later graduate from Bible college, and then from there go on to earn an accredited master's degree at Vanguard University. And it would eventually lead me to finding a full-time job in the political field, which I assumed would be my long-term career. But God had other plans. In 2015, after nearly a decade in government work, my wife and I would sell everything, start over, plant a church called Pursuit, and begin the wildest adventure of our lives. You know, I wouldn't trade those early days of church planting for everything in the world, because it taught me so much. But those early days were not easy. And to be honest, I think I medicated my mental health by virtue of trying to outwork it. My mind would race, but I would run faster. But the harder I worked and the bigger the church grew, the more isolated in my own mind I became. I told myself that the pressure would eventually decrease and the anxiety would one day disappear, but the noise inside my brain only became louder. My wife and I would end up having to sleep in different rooms, not because we were fighting with each other, but because I was fighting with me. My obsessive thought patterns wouldn't let me go to bed unless the room was arranged a certain way and the doors were closed a certain way and the lights looked a certain way, and it became prohibitive for us to try and do life together. I found myself at a breaking point in 2019 when a young man from the church who was living with us committed suicide. I blamed myself. I would text his phone every week for the next year, even though I knew he was gone. As I struggled to make peace with the fact that he was never coming back. And then a few months later, the COVID lockdowns would begin. You know, I was halfway through a PhD in church leadership, but had never taken a course on how to lead a church during a pandemic or recover from the trauma of a roommate killing themselves. And I thought if I ever opened up, I'd lose my job, I'd be disqualified from ministry, I'd embarrass my friends. How could I help others if people really knew what was going on inside of me? How could I call myself a pastor and not even know that the guy living with me was contemplating suicide? I help other people for a living. How can I get help myself? I counsel people every week. How could I ever go to counseling myself? And yet maybe throughout all of these experiences, in many ways it was the mercy of God bringing me to the end of my finite capacity, because it had been nearly 3 decades since my 4th grade teacher said those words in the living room of my childhood home. And I finally had enough. I wasn't gonna run anymore. I was gonna make the decision to get help. You know, I think that there are times in life where maybe the best demonstration of faith is giving yourself permission to heal. Do you know that last year alone, over 252 million prescriptions were issued for mental health conditions in our nation alone? Over 23% of Americans, or nearly 60 million people, deal with mental health issues in our country today, and over half will never receive treatment for their pain. See, our nation is filled with people who struggle in their minds, but because of stigma, or stubbornness, or embarrassment, or fear, they never get the help they need to become the best version of who God intended them to be. You know, Mrs. Rutherford was right. Something was wrong with Russell. But see, Mrs. Rutherford didn't have permission to write the next chapter of my life. I still stutter from time to time. I still sleep with every light on in my room most nights, and I don't know why. I still have obsessive routines that make sense to no one but me. I still fidget, and I still count. I count the syllables of my sentences to ensure their cohesiveness with my other sentences, and that's why it takes so long for me to write sermons, because I'm counting syllables. And if that sounds crazy, it's because it is. But all of this only proves one thing. If God can use someone like me, He can use anyone. You know, my healing has come by virtue of 2 primary paths over the last few years. The first has been spiritual, and the second has been practical. See, I believe that God gives us breakthrough on Sundays, but then tasks us with follow through on Mondays. See, and I can point to significant moments in church where I received a touch from God and felt transformation in my mind, but I knew for me personally, I would need to commit to an ongoing therapeutic relationship with a counselor in order to walk out the fullness of my spiritual transformation. And that's when I found Dr. Jantz and his staff at the Center, which is a Christian counseling organization located in Edmonds, Washington. And I made a commitment to get the help that I so desperately needed. I was diagnosed as having OCD alongside generalized anxiety disorder. And maybe for the first time in my life, it made sense for why it felt the way I did. See, I don't know if my pathology was chemical, social, environmental, or spiritual. It's probably a mix of all 4. But what I did know was that I was finally taking back control of my life, because I wasn't formed in my mother's womb by my 4th grade teacher. And I wasn't anointed to preach by my 4th grade teacher. And I wasn't set apart for the ministry by my 4th grade teacher. It was God who called me, and it would be God who sustained me. And if I would do my part, God would do His. See, my path to healing forced me to wrestle with reality. I was in pain, but I didn't have to stay that way. And if I would use the tools that God had already put in my pathway. I could get better and stay better for the rest of my life. And I think this is the problem we face today. Many people stop short in their healing journey because they find out what's wrong and then succumb to that diagnosis. And I'm here to tell you, a doctor may be able to diagnose you, but only Jesus can heal you. And you know what's crazy? When I ended up in that counseling office, finally willing to get real with that which I had been running from for so many years, my healing didn't begin with 37-year-old Russell or 38-year-old Russell or 39-year-old Russell attaching a Band-Aid to an open wound. My healing began when the God who is outside of time and space stepped into the hallway of 9-year-old Russell and told me, Russell, something may have been wrong back then, but only I have permission to write the next chapter of your story. Tomorrow at 8 a.m., I will be where I am at every Monday morning, the counseling office in downtown Edmonds. Why? Because I am healed, but I want to stay that way. And that requires me to maintain transparent, therapeutic, medical relationships where I can process pain in a healthy way, because the enemy only wins if I stay silent. And if it is true that we overcome the devil by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony, then let this be mine. 4th grade sucked, but Christ's blood runs in my veins. His thoughts now fill my head. And the God that I serve is still in the business of healing bodies, souls, and minds. On this Sunday, I find myself being drawn, oddly enough, to the narrative of Ruth, because her life had been filled with hardship. She's got a husband who has died. She is barren, and the land that she is living in is experiencing famine, which is simply an outside representation of an interior condition. And to make matters worse, ethnically, Ruth is a Moabite, a sworn enemy of God's people. And Moses fights the Moabites, David fights the Moabites, Jehoshaphat fights the Moabites, the judges fight the Moabites. Literally for thousands of years, the Moabites are known for their animosity and hostility against the Hebrew children. If you were a betting man, you wouldn't even bet 1 penny on Ruth to even survive her next season. But when all hope seems lost, the scriptures reveal a woman named Naomi who will function as the linchpin for her turnaround. See, Naomi is Ruth's mother-in-law, and she announces to Ruth that she is leaving the desert. She's gonna travel back home to her original hometown of Bethlehem. And Naomi gives Ruth permission to either stay where she's at or follow her back to Bethlehem. Notice Naomi doesn't force Ruth to go with her. In fact, she kind of encourages her to stay back. Why? Because Ruth needed to make the decision for Ruth. I'm not being forced to change. I'm not being manipulated to move. I've made this decision for me. I am simply unwilling to live the same type of life I've been living. Famine might be where I made my friends, but it's not where I'm making my future. I'm going to Bethlehem with you. Why? Because when the fear of staying the same outweighs the fear of change, that is when we change. And hear me, friend. Like Ruth, you can have everything working against you. And all God needs is one person in your zip code who can see beyond your famine in order for you to have a new lease on life. So Ruth and her mother-in-law Naomi embark on a long journey to a little city named Bethlehem, where everything is about to change for the better. Ruth is broke, she's busted, she's disgusted. She's a barren, widowed Moabite living with her mother-in-law in a Jewish town called Bethlehem. And she needs food. So you know what Ruth does? She functions as a beggar, collecting leftover scraps of barley left behind by farmers in the fields. But while she is working with her hands, God is in the background rewriting her history, because what Ruth doesn't notice is that the man who owns the fields in which she is working is named Boaz, and for whatever reason, Ruth has caught his eye. Hear me today. The field in which you work contains the miracle for what you need. Follow me. The scraps Ruth was collecting couldn't fix the fact that she was a barren, widowed Moabite. But it was her necessary contribution to a miracle in motion, because if she would do her part, God would do his. See, Ruth didn't need scraps to make dinner. She needed a husband who would redeem her broken estate. The same thing happens with Jesus in the New Testament. When Jesus notices that the crowds are hungry and weary from being with him all day, he directs the disciples to feed them. And Philip responds, "Oh, we'd have to go into the city and spend more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have just one bite." And Jesus says, "Bring me that sack lunch. I'll take 5 loaves and 2 fishes and I'll feed 5,000. The sack lunch was a necessary contribution to a miracle that was already in motion. Why? Because the field in which you work contains the miracle for what you need. So I've heard a lot of advice over the last decade of pastoring in the Northwest from well-meaning but misinformed people. They'd say things like this: oh, Russ, if you just move out of Washington, you won't deal with all this mental health stuff. If you just quit preaching, you'd feel so much better. If you just worked less, or planted a church in Arizona, or saw the sun more, or got to a more conservative region, or went on vacation more often. If you would just do these things, everything that you deal with in your mind would clear up. No. My miracle is in this field. My miracle is in this house. My miracle is amongst these people. My miracle is in this region. And you better hear me today. We may have started as beggars in the field, but one day we will own the fields we used to beg in. What people end up doing is running from one field to the next their entire life, hoping that healing is waiting for them on the other side of a shift in their location, without realizing that the unfortunate reality of life is that you take you with you wherever you go. And I would encourage you to believe today that God so loves you and so has foreordained your steps and so gone ahead of you to make a table for you. Yes, even in front of your enemies, and yes, even when that enemy is you, that he has already prepared the miracle that you are looking for in this house today. And I would venture to say that miracle is already in motion, even if you don't know it yet. Because while you're picking up scraps, just hoping to get an encouraging word, just hoping to get somebody to agree with you in prayer, just hoping that the worship set can lift your mood, there is one who functions as your kinsman redeemer, and you have caught his eye, and his intention is to do good on your behalf. And you may have came in barren, but you're gonna leave barren fruit. You may have came in famine, but you're going to leave in harvest. You may have came in as a Moabite, but you're leaving as a Hebrew, because you've caught the eye of the one who can redeem you from the pit. Now in Ruth 3, it's now harvest time in the city of Bethlehem, and Boaz has gone to the threshing floor to separate his grain. And so Naomi concocts a master plan, and she shares it with Ruth. And this is what the Bible says. Now, one day Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. And tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Therefore, wash yourself, anoint yourself, put on your best garment, go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he is finished eating and drinking. Well, watch the fourfold advice of Naomi to her daughter-in-law, Ruth. You ought to wash yourself. You ought to anoint yourself. You ought to dress yourself. But whatever you do, do not promote yourself. And friend, I would submit to you today that if you want to have victory in your mind, you ought to listen to the 4-step strategy from the book of Ruth. We wash ourselves in the Word of God according to Ephesians 5 and 26. We have an anointing that abides within us by virtue of the Spirit of God according to 2 Timothy 1. We clothe ourselves in the full armor of God according to Ephesians 6, and we humble ourselves in the sight of God according to James 4, and he will lift you up. Yeah, you might not know it today, but you are being washed in the Word of God right now. That's what preaching does. In a moment, you'll have an opportunity to humble yourself by coming to these altars to receive prayer. As you come to these altars to receive prayer, you will be anointed with oil as an act of faith. And you'll leave here dressed in the full armor of God, from the helmet of salvation all the way down to shoes that carry the good news of the gospel of peace. See, everything in Ruth's life is about to change, because when you get washed, you don't smell like you used to. And when you get anointed, you don't think like you used to. And when you get dressed, you don't look like you used to. And when you get humbled, you don't walk like you used to. Oh, it's amazing what a little time at a threshing floor or an altar can do on your behalf. The enemy used famine to destroy Ruth. So God is now going to use harvest to restore Ruth. Your mind may have been your greatest struggle in this last season. It can be God's greatest weapon in this next season. No, you are not just being bandaged up so you can limp through the next decade of your life. You are being healed up, you are being renewed, and your testimony will be, look what the Lord has done on my behalf. But maybe equally as important as what the Bible does say is what the Bible does not say. I want you to notice what the Bible does not say in Ruth 3. It does not say Ruth felt any better. Why? Because the goal isn't feeling better. It's getting better at feeling. Now, sometimes we think of healing like this. One day, my pain will instantaneously disappear in one spontaneous moment, and then I will know I have been healed. I would submit to you today that sometimes healing looks like outgrowing the ability of that painful thing to dictate your outcomes. See, if you deal with anxiety or depression or obsessive tendencies or bipolar, does healing mean that you will never have an anxious moment in your mind again? Probably not. More than likely, your healing looks like outgrowing the ability of anxiety to control your life. Ruth meets Boaz. They end up getting married. They will have a son who ends up becoming the grandfather of David, placing Ruth in the lineage of Christ. Her story is fundamentally redeemed from the inside out. But do you know what that healing process never did? Took away the pain of having to bury her first husband. Taking away the pain of her having to leave her home to trust her mother-in-law to go to a city that she had never heard of before. But you know what her healing meant? I can recognize that those things have happened to me without allowing them to dominate the purview of my life. See, last week I was preaching in Arizona. It was actually an incredible honor to be invited by Pastor Tommy Barnett to preach at his church in Phoenix. And over the last year and a half, I've been taking my boy Matthew with me. And we always are gone for the same amount of time, between 3 and 4 days. He always packs the same amount of clothes. He always carries the same exact luggage. Every time that we go on a trip, it's rinse, repeat. But this trip was different. Dad got the times wrong on the flights. We ended up having to race from the hotel to drop the car off at the rental facility, to jump on the tram, to take us to the airport, to run through security, to barely make our gate in time. But I noticed something on Friday afternoon as we were running through the Phoenix airport. That every time that I would look to my left side, there Matthew was with me, keeping the same pace as Dad ran through the airport. And it struck me that this was a very different experience than I had with him a year and a half ago when he first started traveling with me. He would constantly be lagging behind, even though he was carrying the same luggage and wearing the same backpack and packing the same amount of clothes. Every time I would look to my left or my right, there Matthew would be lagging behind me. And what I noticed is that over the last year and a half, the weight hasn't changed. The luggage hasn't changed. The travel hasn't changed. But he has. So now he's able to keep up with Dad, not because his weight has decreased, but because his strength has increased. I think about healing in this way. I've had God instantaneously touch me in moments at the altar. And I've also had God work with me through progressive moments in my life. And I think as it pertains to my mental health, I don't know if there will ever be a time where I'm in the car and some of those obsessive tendencies aren't barking in the background. but they no longer have permission to hold the steering wheel, because healing has looked like me outgrowing the ability of those tendencies to dictate my direction. And that's what we're believing for today. That's why we're partnering with people in prayer at this altar, because even though you might not recognize it, or maybe you can't even feel it, I believe by faith the miracle has already begun to transpire in your life. And this is the message of Ruth. The enemy can steal your stuff, but he can't keep your stuff. And today, the enemy is going to lose his mind, because you're getting back a sound mind. Because God is still in the business of taking barren beggars and turning them into married mothers. Here's what's crazy. When Boaz married Ruth, she became joint owner of the same fields she used to beg in. And hear me, friend, you've been working the battlefield of your mind long enough. It's time to switch positions. Not as a beggar who is driven by every whim of a field that you don't own and cannot control, but instead as one who, with God's help, sits in the driver's seat, allowing your thoughts, your mind, your energy, and your emotion to drive you in the direction that you should go, that you would never depart from it. At this altar today, we're going to pray and believe for supernatural healing in your mind, the breaking of every diagnosis, the reversal of every curse, and the restoring of every worn out place in your mind. But what we aren't going to do is offer medical advice or tell you to stop taking your medicine. What we are going to do is pray in faith, believe for breakthrough, encourage you to follow through, and trust God together that your best days are not behind you, they're ahead of you. I think that maybe there was a time in my life where I felt like if anybody got access to the backstage of my mind and how I feel and what I wrestle with, I would lose the ability or the influence to lead. And what I feel like now is that if I don't share what is happening in the backstage of my mind, I'll lose the credibility to lead. I think what people are actually looking for is authentic and transparent. Because when you tell your story, it gives people permission to take a deep breath in and go, oh, somebody who understands maybe a little bit of what I'm walking through. And I'm here to let you know today, if we want to be in this thing for the long haul, it's not enough to love God with just our hearts and our souls. I need God's help and His healing to love Him with my mind. I'm not communicating to you today as somebody who's like arrived and now I'm a guru who's gonna write a best-selling book on how you can be successful just like me. No, I'm somebody who's parked my pain at the foot of the cross because I don't know what else to do with it. But after all these years, He's still the one who says, cast all your cares and anxiety upon me, for I am the one who cares for you. You were not built to carry what you've been carrying, and it will crush you unless you release it. And it's scary to release things you've held on to for 30 years, because if we were to be honest, there's a part of our identity that does not know how to function without our dysfunction. Like part of me being obsessive is why the church has worked. Because this is all I do. This is all I think about. I go to bed thinking about the church. I sleep for 2 hours. I wake up thinking about the church. Every day I work at the church. And part of me worries, like maybe if I get real freedom and healing in my brain, I won't be as successful as I used to be, which is why I think Jesus asked the question, do you want to be made well? And I guess I'm at the point in my life where I've got to trust that it's actually God who's been the one who's been building this church the entire time. And if I want to be in this for the long haul, I need healing in my mind. And today you can trust that whatever you give to God, He will give back in a better, more redeemed fashion in the next season of your life. If you give Him your troubled mind, He will give you a sound mind. If you give Him your anxiety, He will give you His peace. If you give Him your weakness, He will give you His strength. It's always a trade that is in your favor. I was not built to carry what I have been carrying, and I've got to give it to God in order for me to trust Him that He can take me and this church to the next level. I want to invite my good friend and really, I think, a hero in this region and a big reason why I'm even standing here today to the stage, my friend Dr. Jantz, who runs the Center, A Place of Hope, Christian Counseling in Edmonds, Washington.
We thought we'd do a session right here.
This is on the house, though. My insurance don't cover this one, but
Such an important Sunday.
wow.
And there will be breakthroughs today.
Yeah.
And if you're struggling, come up for prayer. This is the beginning of the turnaround.
Yeah. Dr. Jantz, you've been in the business for 40 years. You've written dozens of books.
46 books.
46. I was giving you a discount, but 46. You've counseled tens of thousands of people across the nation, really across the world, from high-profile clients where everybody would know their name to just regular Joe Blows. And I think that having spirit-filled medical professionals who can speak to the mental health crisis in America is more important now than ever before. And I don't know if you have noticed this shift, but it feels like for me, we're beginning to break the stigma that has kept people from getting the help that they so desperately need, feeling like if I'm open or honest, somehow I'm weak or disqualified. Because if I was just a real man or a real woman, I just wouldn't feel the way that I do. What have you noticed in the trends as you have counseled, and what do you think the future holds for these conversations in the church?
Well, this is a very important conversation, and I'm so grateful that Pursuit is doing this. Yeah. We need to do this more in the church because this is where people are living. We have anxiety as the number one diagnosis in our country. It's number one. Wow. That's above all other diagnoses. We had a pandemic of sorts. Depression was number one. Now it's anxiety. But we're never have seen addiction levels where they are now. Addictions of all kinds have skyrocketed. So when anxiety goes high, so does addiction. And so often we need to not hide that. So many folks, and I'm glad we can talk about it, but so many folks are hiding in shame. And there's the secrets, there's the trauma, there's the issues that haven't been dealt with. And we try to contain it, but we make ourselves more and more toxic. Yeah. And so one of the things we have to do is tell the truth.
Right.
We've got to deal with it. And I love that you mentioned 2 Timothy 1:7, for the Lord has not given us a spirit of fear. Because you always have to address the spiritual, always. But of power, love, and a sound mind. And sometimes we need to just settle down and go, okay, Lord, and pray give me the discernment. What's missing for my sound mind? Sometimes it's unforgiveness. Sometimes it's things that I'm still hiding. Sometimes it's shame. Sometimes it's that abuse. and I've pretended that everything's okay, but I'm still struggling with my mind. And so it's not that the struggle's over, but I have the power with Christ to deal with the struggle.
Wow. That's profound. Yeah, I think one of the things that I've appreciated about our relationship over the years is that every time I'm with you, I feel like you give me permission to heal a little bit more. And I think, but I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people look at like healing as like a box that you check instead of a life process that you engage with. And so then what happens is instead of managing things in such a way that they can shift the trajectory of their destiny, they end up just mitigating crisis. So crisis hits, and then Dr. Jantz gets an emergency phone call, and then you don't get that phone call again until 9 months later when crisis hits. And I feel that way often in church and in pastoring. It's like you can always count on the people who's gonna blow you up when they have crisis. And it's not like being in church every Sunday is going to prevent you from having crisis, but it does give you a lot better chance at being able to manage it in a positive way. And I'm sure you feel like this or sense this almost revolving door of folks that maybe sometimes you look at and you're like, I can't want you to get help more than you want to get help.
Right.
Like I wish I could climb in your brain and make decisions for you, but I can't. But I'm trying to invite you into a process. I think even for me, like the first time I showed up, I'm like checking my watch and like going, okay, so at 60 minutes we're done, and you're like, you got HIPAA laws, so you can't tell anybody I saw you, and we're good, and then it's like over. And then I remember like leaving from that counseling office thinking to myself, I don't feel any different. I'm not sure if it worked. And then going, oh, this is probably somebody that I need to engage with on a regular basis for an extended season in order to get the maximum benefit, which is what I did. But could you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, we can make progress every day.
Yeah.
Sometimes we want it instant.
Yeah.
But there's a journey in the pain, and we can be strengthened. There's a journey that God will use and turn it around. And I would not be doing what I'm doing for 41 years if I didn't see lives change for good with God.
Yeah.
That's what keeps me going, to see lives change. And I can tell you today, I know there's points of hopelessness.
Right.
I know it. And I know there's points where it feels like you can't go on. I'm so overwhelmed. And I know personally, that hope comes when there's a plan. And so sometimes we need help with the plan. Mental health's like a 1,000-piece puzzle. You get a lot of pieces together, but sometimes you need somebody and prayer and discernment and wisdom to help put those last pieces in place.
Yeah, really good.
And you gotta keep working on it, because sometimes a piece falls out.
Right.
But we're gonna stay in the game.
Right. But I think too, something else that I've really benefited from in relationship with you and the center is that not just that aspect of needing to forgive others. I think a lot of times when we think about unforgiveness, it's the idea of holding on to something that somebody has done to us. And often what I've found in at least my own personal mental health journey is that I've held on to a lot of unforgiveness against me.
Yes.
Like not wanting to forgive Russell for not being better than I want to be.
Right.
For not being stronger than I want to be. For not being more mentally healthy or sharp than I want to be. Like thinking that I've, and it affects your interior dialogue. If you were a real pastor, if you were a real Christian, if you really believed the things that you were saying, if you really believed in prayer, and you're a fraud, or you're a fake, or you're an imposter, and how can you preach this to people, and yet you're struggling, and you end up injuring yourself with your interior dialogue. And I found like it was actually a huge thing that helped unlock that next layer of freedom for me when I forgave Russell for hurting Russell.
Yes. Self-forgiveness, we hear a lot about forgiveness, but this issue of self-forgiveness and setting ourselves free.
Yeah.
And that it's not okay to do that. Actually, it's a very important piece to the healing.
Yeah.
Yes. And so forgiveness comes in different layers, but sometimes we're still punishing ourselves and we're still beating ourselves up. And remember, the enemy uses our mind to bring us down, uses our mind to destroy us. And so it's always important that we look at, is there any unforgiveness? Self or others? Because unforgiveness is a toxicity to ourselves that will poison us and poison all of our relationships.
Right. One of the things that I appreciate about you, obviously, is your heart and your ability, your anointing for writing. And you've got a new book called So Much to Live For, which is really a roadmap on how to get hope back in your life.
Today, I felt that there would be some who are struggling with hope. And you're wondering, is it worth it? And sometimes it's life and death, and you're teetering on, do I keep going? And today, I brought a gift for you. So much. If you're in that place, this is our gift to you to pick up on the way out.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We have a screen, I think, with a QR code as well, and a text code for resources. You know, anytime that we talk about a subject like this, I think it motivates people to ask the question, hey, is there another step that I need to take? And if you're in that boat today and thinking about needing to take another step in the professionalization of your healing process, we've prepared a list of resources that lists some of the Christian counselors that we work with in the region. Obviously, it's very important who you're taking life advice from. This isn't just about Googling, you know, the counselor with the next available opening near me. You'll get somebody who convinces you you're in the wrong gender from the wrong planet, and you'll be more demonized than you were to start. That's not helpful.
And that does happen.
And that does happen, which is why you shouldn't let me counsel you, because you'll be very confused. But the reality is, you know, we want people to have resources. And it's not because we think that everybody, you know, somebody asked me the other day, well, does everybody need counseling? And I go, I don't know. I mean, I know what I needed. And here's the reality. You know what the best medicine is for you? The one that works. And so, you know, for me, I needed counseling with a PhD because that worked for my brain. You might need to go spend time outside. You might need to go out to eat. You might need to go on a date. You might need a mixture of 3 or 4 things. You might need medicine. You have permission to heal in whatever way best benefits the ecosystem of your life. Why? Because you are a unique person. You're not a copy. You're unique. And we wanted to create a resource list because some folks may be in need of that today. Hey, why don't you stand with me as we wrap up, and let me pray for you.